morning and welcome back to another COP26 live at Salford University. How are you this morning, Marta?
Hello, Andy. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm really good. I've just been catching up on some news, and we just had the first draft of the COP26 agreement released, I think, last night. And just like in the discussions in the conference, we can see a lot of focus on strengthening countries' commitments and providing support for developing countries, and just a really big push for accelerated action. And today, action is what we're talking about because we're talking about transport. It is the theme of today's day at COP, so there should be loads of interesting discussions going around. And today we will be talking about specifically active travel in Salford, so should be quite interesting.
Definitely, and I saw a bit of the news this morning, heard the radio this morning as well, and already people are a little bit anxious that the COP26 is going to push the can down the road and have another meeting later in the year to confirm things. So I think the feeling is at the moment that the success of COP26 is very much in the balance, and of course the Prime Minister's back again today. So we'll see what happens, but it's I think it's a bit of anxiety about how much commitment will be made by the end of COP26.
Yes, definitely. That's why I think these last few days will be really important. I still have hope. And I think that's why it's important to focus on what we can do in our everyday lives.
Definitely. Well, certainly hope is a massive theme today at Salford University when we have the panel discussion of Motherlode, the movie, which is being led by our colleagues Luke and Graham, who I'd love to bring into the stream right now. So welcome in, Graham, and welcome in, Luke.
Morning, guys. Morning, guys.
And it's wonderful to have you both here ahead of the discussion tonight, which takes place at 6 p.m. And I think if you haven't yet registered for it, you can still, but you'd have to watch it before if you can. But I saw it on Monday night. We had a couple of watch parties where people watched the film. So, Luke, tell us a little bit about Motherlode. What's the film that people are discussing tonight as part of the Festival of Social Science?
Motherlode is a documentary made by this filmmaker in the States where she tells her personal journey really throughout life, from sort of being a young woman in a university struggling with sort of accepting herself in her sort of amongst her peers, and she just discovers cycling. And there was a quote in the film that really sort of resonated with me where she said, discovering the bike saved my soul. But then she finds that she gets married and has children, and all of a sudden she buys a car. And then all of a sudden, she's spending loads of her time in the car, moving her children around, going to school, going to the grocery shop. And she started to notice the impact that had on her own well-being. And she realized, I miss cycling so much, you know. I wish I could go back to those times. She lives in California, and a lot of her neighbors are sort of very famous cyclists. One of her neighbors invented the mountain bike. And she starts talking about how we can potentially sort of develop alternatives to this problem. And going on this journey, she discovers the cargo bike. For those viewers who might not know what a cargo bike is, it's effectively a bicycle that's designed to carry heavy loads. So if you can imagine a bicycle with sort of perhaps a big box on the front or a box on the back that you can load up with groceries or children, whatever it might be, and you're able to then sort of cycle these heavier things around. And the film sort of tells the journey of her discovering that, the impact that it has on her life, her family, and the impact that it has on the world more broadly.
Yeah, I actually caught the screening last night of the film, and it is incredible. So I recommend everyone watches it and tunes into the discussion tonight. And Graham, in terms of active travel, obviously you're in research, but I would be interested to know what was your personal journey into active travel? How did you become interested in it?
It's a very good question. I always been interested in environmental issues, and always used to use public transport actually, and then decided to try cycling at some point. And I kind of felt it wasn't for me because I'm not a kind of sporty person. But then I discovered you don't really have to be a sporty person to cycle around. You know, it's just a fairly gentle exercise, and everyone can do it. So that's how I got into it, and I find it now extremely convenient and a really good way to build exercise into my life, which I probably wouldn't do otherwise, to be honest. So it's quite good for me.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that because I'm not a sporty person whatsoever, and I'll be starting my journey with active travel next year. Sorry, but look, the same question to you, because I know that you are quite active. You do quite a lot of things like climbing and running. So, what was your journey into active travel?
I think the biggest sort of pivotal moment for me was moved to Manchester maybe about 12 years ago, and maybe had about 3 or 4 years in the city where I didn't cycle. I was just doing everything by foot, had a car, just thought that was the normal way that you got around. And then I sort of fell into Friends of the Earth Manchester, and that's actually where I met Graham initially, and then we sort of re-met a few years later at the university. But I met all these sort of environmentally minded people who were getting about on their bike, and all of a sudden I realized that they were turning up on time. They were getting places much more efficiently than me, faster than me. And it was about 2 years where I just kept playing this idea in my mind, going, yeah, it's probably a better idea to get a bike. You should probably get a bike. But, you know, this is the norm, so just crack on with what you do. And then I eventually made the shift, and I thought, why didn't I do this like 3 or 4 years ago? It's so much better for me, so much better suited for the way I live my life anyway. And then from there, as I said, bumped into Graham a few years later at the university, realised that we were both working in research, and sort of ended up setting up our research group, which is called Healthy Active Cities, where we look at sort of active travel research across Greater Manchester and more broader across the UK as well.
That's really interesting to hear. I'm a big cyclist myself. And Graham, I wonder, how do you see things in Greater Manchester at the moment? Is there sort of progress to being more cycling friendly, or how are we doing?
We're doing well in some respects, in that Greater Manchester as a whole is investing in something called the B Network, which sees quite a bit of money going into walking and cycling across Greater Manchester. So people will, particularly if you live at the moment in Chorlton or Old Trafford, you'll be seeing routes being built with separated cycle routes on the side, and these things called cyclope junctions, where you get a roundabout with kind of, or a junction with dedicated cycle lanes to guide you around the junctions as if you're on a bike. However, if generally speaking across Greater Manchester, you probably don't see that at the moment. So, you know, the experience hasn't changed radically, but the point is that there's this investment going in now, which should, over the next few years, maybe 5 years, people will start to see these routes and start to see that cycling might be an option for them. I mean, that's the hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can see part of that on our campus, actually, because the B Network Cycle Scheme launched exclusively on our campus for the first few weeks, and is launching officially on the 18th of November. So look out for that, because you'll be able to just grab a bike and go anywhere. And I would like to ask about your research group, which you briefly mentioned, the Healthy Active Cities. At Salford, there is a lot of research going on into transport. And I would like to ask you a little bit about the research you do as part sort of your main findings from that.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I start, and we've been, you know, there's a team of research, and we're all working on well, we all have focus on different things. One of the main things at the moment is a study of the Lime hire scheme on our campus and around Salford. So these are the e-scooters that you'll be seeing around Salford. So we're looking at who's using them, who's not using them, why they're using them, why they're not using them, and looking at like kind of how that varies across things like gender and age in particular, and looking at how to make those schemes more inclusive in the sense of being useful to more people, and also including more groups of people. For example, if older people, for example, feel it's not for them, why is that? How do we understand that? And another project we've been working on is looking at low traffic neighbourhoods, adaptive travel neighbourhoods, which is being led by our colleague Harry. And that's looking at when you intervene in a neighbourhood, and you might put, for example, some planters that restrict car traffic coming in, or at least slow it down. What does that mean for communities? How do communities find that? Does it mean that they can walk around and feel more confident? Does it mean they're more likely to cycle? And we've just released a report on that this week, actually. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that. Our other big project, which I won't talk about because Luke's been leading on it, is looking at e-cargo bikes, which is obviously very relevant for our panel this evening.
Yeah, to pick up from what Graham sort of introduced there, we've also just finished, well, we're in the process of writing a paper, but last year we did a sort of 6 to 12 month scoping study into the potential for looking at electric cargo bikes across Greater Manchester and the Northwest. And we spoke to a bunch of different really interesting people who are using e-cargo bikes for lots of different applications, to try and get an understanding of what the potential is for them as vehicles for potentially replacing vans, making more sustainable journeys for sort of bigger businesses, smaller businesses, families, individuals, what needs to change in terms of infrastructure, all this kind of stuff. And we found some really interesting findings from speaking to a sort of cross-section of people across the Northwest. And we ultimately found that there seems to be a huge amount of potential for the bikes and a sort of large public will to make them work. There are just some challenges sort of to be overcome before we can sort of mainstream this sort of technology. Some of these challenges are very similar. They share a lot of parallels with cycling, and perhaps some of these are fairly unsurprising, but, cycling in the rain, cycling in heavy traffic, overcoming those sort of sensitive safety barriers or weather conditions are sort of a bit of an ongoing challenge. But what we're finding is that in the last mile, sort of that area of congested city centres, where obviously driving a van around, driving a car around can often be quite a slow, cumbersome process, we're finding that e-cargo bikes really excel in these kind of areas because they're able just to nip through the congested spaces and get deliveries done on time, which is a really sort of positive thing. And just to sort of go back to something Marta said earlier about the bike scheme being launched on campus, we're really excited to see this take off as well, because the first project we did at Healthy Active Cities was to look at the bike share scheme in Manchester from 3 or 4 years ago. Some of you might remember the Mobike scheme that was fraught with challenges and problems and ultimately led to the company pulling out of Manchester for a number of reasons. But we thought, there's so much potential in sort of creating universal access to cycling across Greater Manchester. It's a nice idea, it's just executed badly. And then we started hearing these rumblings from sort of the local authority that there is going to be a Greater Manchester bike share scheme on the way. And when we saw that it was officially announced and now the university's got the first sort of lot of bikes, just think that's really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, go ahead, Graham.
No, I was just agreeing with Luca. Really, it's great to see it starting at Salford and this opportunity now for people to try out the bike share bikes, because access to bikes is one of the issues of that kind of making that initial step of getting into cycling difficult. It's like, well, do I go out and buy a bike if I'm just going to try it? No, I'd rather just try one out. So it gives people that opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that what's interesting is thinking about what's happening at COP and how we try to make sort of key interventions that make a difference. And I know that different cities have gone through different sort of bike systems in the past. Do you think there's something better about these systems that we've got coming up, or what's the sort of challenges with getting people into this sort of frame of mind?
Yeah, very good question. There's a lot of challenges. I mean, partly it relates to the barriers to cycling generally, as Luke mentioned, that if you have a city that's nice to cycle in, people are more likely to use the bike share scheme. But it's also making sure the bikes are kind of suitable for that city, which I think we've moved on now. This new scheme has, it has gears. The bikes are a bit more solid, a bit more adjustable than the bikes we had before. So I hope that's a very positive thing. It's also really good that they've got e-bikes now in this scheme, because that just gives people that extra kind of, if you're worried about not being able to get up some of the hills or something, it just gives you that extra bit of support, particularly when you're first trying cycling. So that's really good because it just makes it more inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. And could you tell us just a bit for people who don't know what it actually is, what an e-bike is and what an e-scooter is and how they actually work? How do they help you move around?
Yeah, I can pick this up. So an electric bike, if you imagine a sort of standard bicycle in your mind, one that maybe you had as a child, and what that effectively has attached to it is a sort of fairly small electric motor that's powered by a battery. And what happens is when you start to cycle, this battery kicks in and sort of adds a certain amount of acceleration to the force that you're putting through the bike. So it basically just helps you move along quicker without having to put the full amount of energy in to get to what you usually have to do to get that speed. And there's a number of benefits to what this brings the potential user. It allows people perhaps to travel further if they felt like they didn't necessarily have the sort of physical ability to travel that far on a conventional bicycle. It also allows them to tackle hills. And in the case of cargo bikes, particularly the film we were talking about earlier, Motherload, it allows you to carry heavier goods over longer distances or, again, up steeper hills. And that has massive implications for what the bikes have the potential to do in terms of freight and delivery and that sort of industrial application of bikes. E-scooters are slightly different in the sense that they are sort of, again, they look very much like a conventional scooter that we may have all had when we were very young. They again have sort of a form of an electric motor attached to the vehicle. But rather than having to pedal a bit like you do with e-bikes, the e-scooter sort of propels you along completely by itself, really. It's got a little brake, it's got a little accelerator on the handlebars. You simply kick off to engage the motor, and then the motor takes off itself, and sort of before you know it, you're scooting around by yourself, which is quite interesting technology.
Definitely, and I wonder whether there's, obviously I know many people that have got e-bikes, and as you say, they are fantastic. I mean, they're giving a new lease of life to people that, especially perhaps have said goodbye to their bicycles or feel that they have too far to go on a bicycle for their commute, and the e-bike is just giving them a bit more help to get there within the time frame that they need to make it work. But I know, and I think the sort of superficial way of thinking about it is it's cheating, it's not really exercising, but actually I think everyone has very different needs in their sort of day-to-day lives. And these vehicles are, I think, giving people a new lease of life. Graham, I wonder if you sort of think about what's happening at COP26 at the moment, where we're trying to see major commitments being made. How crucial do you see it for sort of cities to transform the way in which they work, particularly around their sort of travel systems?
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial, as you say. I think there's a lot of discussion about electric cars and electric vehicles generally, and that's important. But I think the big question is really how we completely change how we get around cities. And that means a lot of investment into walking and cycling, into bike routes, bike share, e-bikes as well, and cargo bikes and all that stuff. As well as electric, what the cars that we have in the future are going to be electric. That's almost a given. But the thing is that we should be moving away from an emphasis on the car. So what we have will be electric, but we have to emphasize all those other modes of transport. And this, more than probably any of the issues they're discussing, is all about local authorities. It's all about money and resources for local authorities to do stuff locally, to provide those facilities that enable people to walk and cycle, not just to ask people to walk and cycle, but to make it easy for them to do so.
Yeah, that's definitely a crucial part of it. And Luke, I'm wondering what your reflections are on what's happening on COP26 in relation to hopefully what's going to happen in terms of travel, what's happening in terms of emissions, but also in this call for us to sort of feel closer to nature, get to know our world outside, and adjust our lifestyles. You are a filmmaker and a photographer as well, wildlife photographer. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you think about what's been happening so far, and maybe what your hopes are for the next few days?
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite apt that we're sort of having this conversation on the dawn of Transport Day at COP. So it's going to be very interesting to see sort of what the headlines are going to be coming out throughout the remainder of the day. I think it's a really complicated problem, and I think it's definitely not one that's got an easy solution to it. As Graham said, we're almost definitely moving in the direction of moving from fossil fuel powered vehicles to electric vehicles. But what we have to make sure that we do is not just simply replace this for that. And we've still got congestion, we've still got traffic, we've still got all of this sort of messy transport system. We have to sort of pivot a little bit, but then also, go back to basics to a certain degree and revisit the importance of active travel, not only in terms of efficiency and air pollution and carbon emissions and all that kind of stuff, which is in the context of COP, but also just in terms of well-being, in terms of actually getting to your destination in the fastest way or the most efficient way possible, and making it affordable. I know there's been some sort of murmuring so far of sort of the ultimate decisions of COP being kicked down the road to later in the year at the moment, which doesn't bode well, but I really hope there's still time to turn that ship around over the next few days so we can actually get some sort of tangible commitments. But yeah, I think you mentioned sort of my other hat as a wildlife filmmaker and photographer, and I think our relationship with the natural world is absolutely crucial when it comes to the question of carbon emissions and climate change. In order to care about the decisions that we make, we have to understand why we're making them, rather than just being told to make them or seeing the headlines that doom and disaster is on its way, and if you don't change now, it's going to be too late. we have to have an emotional and an empathetic stake in this, as well as a financial and an economical and a practical stake in it as well. We have to care about the decisions that we're making. And I think maybe there's an opportunity in the landscape of COP to push that agenda a little bit more, and maybe change the language around the fact that, the apocalypse is coming, and, the end is nigh, and all this kind of stuff, because there's a lot of research coming out that's saying, telling people that it's the end of the world is just going to spark apathy and inaction, rather than inspiring people to come together for positive action. So I think the language is quite important as well.
And I think that's also why, tonight's discussion about Motherload is absolutely well timed, because it is incredibly inspiring. And I think what really struck me that was really powerful is how many of the people that turned to using cargo bikes actually were surprised by some of the ways in which it transformed their lives for the better. Emotionally, spiritually for some of them, and certainly in terms of the practicality of day to day. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful to get on a bicycle, because it does bring you things that you don't expect. And Graham, before we sort of wrap up, I wonder also about your reflections on COP26. How are you seeing things? What would be your sort of hopes for the end of the week?
Yeah, as Luke said, it'd be such a shame if we kick the metaphorical can down the road, as they say. And it'd be good to have really strong international leadership on climate change and a really strong agreement. However, we don't. We can still get on with lots of things in Greater Manchester and the UK, and we should be doing that. I think what I wouldn't want to see is that people go, oh, there wasn't an agreement, therefore we can't do anything about climate change. There's still loads that individuals to some extent, and then local authorities and our government can be doing. That's really important anyway in terms of our leadership as the UK and in the UK. So I guess that's my thought. But I'm really hopeful that we'll get, particularly today on Transport Day, we'll get some really strong words and commitments around transport that isn't just about electric cars, and also something overall that commits us to being within that carbon budget. That means we won't have runaway climate change, within our lifetimes, within the next decade.
Definitely. And we have a nice comment from Robert there that talks about the importance of thinking about the interconnectedness of natural systems, which of course cycling brings you. Get out on a bicycle and you're very much into the natural world very quickly in all weathers. I was very impressed by the woman who takes her 6 children on her cargo bike. That is real commitment, and I can't imagine how hard that is to cycle, but that should be our goal. That sort of level of commitment. Well, thanks so much.
That was even, sorry, Andy. I don't think that was even an e-cargo bike, was it? I don't think it actually had an electric motor. That was just a bike.
Yeah, there's a lot more we can do for sure. But thank you both for joining us today. And as we mentioned, we've got the discussion that's taking place tonight at 6 p.m, which is live on YouTube. You can still register for the event. But if you're not able to make it, make sure you watch the film, because it's absolutely incredible and will definitely get you, I think, back on a bicycle. So thank you, Graham, and thank you, Luke. We'll see you tonight. And I'll see you tomorrow, Martin, not tonight too.
Yes, see you tomorrow, Andy. Thank you, Luke and Graham, very much.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks, both. Cheers.